Get to the church plant! Get to the church plant! Go! Now!
I'm Pete Mitchell, and he's Peyton Jones, and you're listening to Hardcore Church Planting, the companion podcast for the Church Planter Podcast and Church Planter Magazine. Each week, we'll bring you interviews from planters who are in the trenches making it happen right now. These active church planters bear it all, share their successes, their failures, and what they'd wish they'd known when they were first starting out. Listen in to discover how God is working in their church plant.
You know, when I have a large project at home, sometimes it makes sense to do it by myself. At other times, I actually save money in the long term and have a much better solution if I use an expert. It's really not that much different with church planting. Church planters who focus on building their core team and actually planting the church and partner with portability experts like Portable Church Industries hit the ground running. Yes, you may have to raise more funds up front, but let me tell you something. If I could go back in a time machine and do one thing different in all the churches that I planted, I would go back and have invested that money in Portable Church and all of the super cool kit that they give you to make the volunteers and their lives much, much easier. Trust me, your volunteers will feel invested in, and they're going to give you more of what they got. And that time where people are setting up is going to be a time where it sets the atmosphere for you to thrive. If you're thinking about launching in the next 6 to 36 months, we encourage you to check them out at portablechurch.com.
Hey, Church Planter, welcome to the Church Planter Hardcore Church Planting Podcast. I get my own title right. Hey, guys, I am on here today with a guest who wrote a book, and I have to confess that the reason that I'm doing this interview is because my wife saw this title. I showed it to her, and she said, "You have to interview that guy." So my guest today is Dr. Andrew Root. He is a professor at Luther Seminary and the author of a book entitled The Grace of Dogs, a Boy, a Black Lab, and a Father's Search for the Canine Soul. So welcome onto the show. Should I call you Dr. Root or should I call you Andrew?
Yeah, you can even call me Andy. So that'd be great.
Yeah, we're going way formal.
Hey,
since this is a book about dogs, should we just go with pet names, or does that make it weird?
It may make it a little weird, but if you want to make up pet names for ourselves, I'm open to that.
Yeah, and so what's really amazing about this is my wife literally glued herself to A Dog's Purpose and the sequel, and Marley and Me is seriously one of the best books I've ever read. And I will admit that I read the book Marley and Me, and I even cried during the film. The film was well done. And, so it is very cool to have you on here. You're a different sort of guest to what we normally have, but there's two things that we all know. Number one, church planting is the coolest thing you can ever do. And number two, everybody should like dogs. And if they don't, there's something wrong with them. Those two are universal established facts.
Yeah, I think you can, it depends on your translation, but you can find that in the Bible, I think.
Pretty much. You know, I'm pretty good at finding almost anything I want to in the Bible. So this works really good. So, yeah, man. So tell us, I mean, first off, you know, there's always a story behind a book like this. And this book is about a story. So tell us a little bit about how you came about writing this book.
Yeah, I mean, I had never written anything on animals before. I've done a lot of theological work, but mainly on kind of the practice of ministry, on ministry to younger generations of people, things like that.
And can I stop you for a second? Because you wrote a book called The Theological Turn in Youth Ministry that was awarded Book of Merit by Christianity Today. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, you've written some good stuff. So it's not like listeners, you're listening to a guy like, he graduated Princeton, by the way. It's not like this guy's like, oh, I'll write a book about dogs. No, this guy's, you know, he's got a theological mind here. He's no slouch in theology. So, all right, go.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. So yeah, so I hadn't really done anything like this before, but we had this beloved black lab named Kirby, and actually, speaking of Princeton, we got him just about 3 months into my doctoral studies at Princeton. We went to get milk one it was a Monday night, I think, and came back with a puppy. So he was the biggest impulse buy of our life. And so we had this dog, and we just fell in love with him. We had him before we had kids, and then when our kids came into our lives, the dog and the kids were just so close. And particularly my oldest Owen, the dog Kirby, slept at his bed every night, watched over him, cared for my kids so deeply, was in the middle of all their games. And a few years ago now, Kirby started to not be doing well in spending some nights where he usually didn't spend nights on the cold bathroom floor, and just was really lethargic. So we decided it was time to take him into the vet. And we had a little debate, Cara, my wife, and I, that I thought something was really up here, and she thought he would rally and be back in the backyard chasing the tennis ball soon enough. Well, she took him into the vet, and the vet said, I'm really sorry. There's clearly a huge mass in his stomach. He's in really significant pain, and he shouldn't be moved. So she immediately went home and picked me up and picked the kids up and took us back to the vet to say our goodbyes to Kirby. And we got into that vet's office, and my kids at the time were 8 and 5. And as soon as we got into the examining room and Kirby was laying on that cold linoleum floor, they threw themselves on Kirby's body and just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed with the thought that Kirby would be gone. And then they saw his back leg, which had already been shaved, preparing for the injection that would take his life. And within a few minutes of sobbing, the vet came in and asked us if we were ready, and then injected Kirby's back leg, and you could just see the dog, the life of this dog that we love, leave him. And Owen, somehow, the 8-year-old, had the strength and wisdom, really, and he put his face down next to Kirby's face, nose to nose, and said, the last thing Kirby's going to see is me. And then you just saw the life leave this dog's eyes, and we all just sobbed and sobbed now, and to such an extent that the dog's snout was just drenched wet with my children's tears. And in the middle of this, Owen stood up.
Okay, now,
yeah.
I'm just saying, this is, I should have given a warning, like, this is tear-jerking stuff, man. I've seen Old Yeller. I know where this is going.
Right. And, dog books are supposed to end sad, and this dog book begins sad. So Owen got up and said, I'll be right back. And out of his own volition, went into the waiting room, filled up a Dixie cup of water, came back in, and dipped his finger in the Dixie cup of water and made the sign of the cross on the dog's head and lifted his hands to heaven in prayer, giving God back his dog. And so really what the book is about is why that act felt so right. And what are these animals and what do they actually do for us? So the book's really a journey from that moment to ask that big question. I mean, people so deeply love their dogs. And in some ways, I mean, I think we could even use the word that our dogs, and at least some of our dogs, really minister to us and what's actually going on in this relationship. So it's really the journey of a theologian a Protestant theologian who doesn't ask these questions, watching their family grieve the loss of a dog that we deeply loved, who was a significant part of our family, and asking, where's God in the middle of this? And how do we think about this spiritually? And what does it mean to be human that we're so connected to these animals? And is there some kind of spiritual frequency that connects us with our dogs? So that's really the journey of the book.
Yeah, that's sweet too, man, because I ask a lot of things about animals, and I'm heavily influenced by C.S. Lewis. But it's interesting because I think I understand. I think analytically about a lot of I'm not an intellectual at all. I think analytically about cartoons and video games. So don't get the wrong idea here. But I really, oftentimes have thought, gosh, it's like, I'm a human, and I have a much vaster capacity for all kinds of things than my dog does, apparently. And yet I love this thing so much. My best friend called me up last night and was in tears on the phone because he just came from the hospital unexpectedly, putting his dog down. And, it was, for his first words were, I'm going to try to get through this. And I didn't know what was coming, and it was about his dog. And we were laughing at ourselves at how much these things get in our hearts. And you begin, I think, to understand God through these relationships. And of course, it's infinitely more vast that, it's a weak comparison, but I've often wondered if God gives us animals so that we can understand that we are in his image. Yes, there are certainly things I can look at a dog and say, I have this, the dog has this. I have that, the dog. But there are far more things I could say, I have this, the dog does not have this. And there's that holiness aspect of God, that he is other, but we're in his image. And yet I understand that I can love something that's not even human and laugh at how stupid it is, that this would destroy me when this thing's gone. And yet, so tell us a little bit about some of your findings in this book. I mean, what have been some of the major, here I am pontificating. I didn't write the book. But everybody's an expert on dogs. You probably figured this out, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was part of the journey. I mean, really early on that I'd end up at these theology conferences and meet these eminent theologians. And, one of the things you do around wine or coffee is talk about what's your project you're working on. And, someone would say, well, I'm working on the historical ramifications of reconciliation, or I'm working on, 2 Corinthians view of this or that. And then I would, they'd ask me and be like, well, I'm working on the spirituality of dogs. So it was kind of undercover, kind of looking for these discoveries. But one of the really fascinating things that's happened just in the last decade and a half is there's been a ton of science on dogs. I mean, for decades, no one, even in the sciences, was really studying dogs because they just seem so normal and ordinary. I mean, it'd be like trying to write a scientific doctoral dissertation on the toilet or something. I mean, it's just there. Why would you? It's not that interesting. But the more they've kind of peeled away some of the layers of just overlooking dogs, we've realized these are incredibly unique creatures, and they can do things that very few other animals do. And one of the things that they do that no other animal does is they're attuned to our face, that they really pay deep attention to our gestures and to our face and to our levels of communication. And not just our words. They do. I mean, more than any other animal, they can understand our words, but they also can understand our body language, the kind of inflection of our voice and what that means, that there's just ways they soak up the meaning of our communication. And I think there's something really deep within Protestant theology that talks about word and significance of word and the significance of encounter and face. All over the scriptures, there's this sense of God revealing God's face and our face one to another, and joy in the encounter of the face. And there's just these ways that dogs really deeply connect to our face. And they've done these really interesting research studies where they've taken meat and put it in a metal box that the dog nor the wolf can get to, and they let wolves in, and the wolf can't get to it, but the wolf can find dozens of ingenious ways to try to free it. Well, when they let a dog in, the dog cannot do any of the kind of individual problem solving that a wolf can do, but the dog does the one thing the wolf doesn't do, which the dog goes to the meat, tries to get it out, and after about 15 seconds of not being able to get it out, the dog sits down, looks at the researcher and looks at the box, and looks at the researcher and looks at the box, and essentially what the dog is doing is getting inside the mind of the human being and getting the human being to interact with them in this really significant way. And so that just to me has to have some deep spiritual overtones, that what it means to be human, I think, and even what we say about who God is that God is this relationship of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that there's this deep sense of an interrelationality in God's own self, and then that just reverberates out from us, that we have these deep forms of relationship in our communities, in our families, but there's a way that the dog also echoes that. And one of the reasons that the dogs are so important to us and we grieve them so deeply when they die is because we have a significant, I almost want to say soulful connection to them because of this interconnection of relationship that's really unique. Even next to the cat does not look at our faces or respond to our communication like a dog does.
I think the cat's like us in this whole thing. Like, we're like, hey, I love you. And, the cat's like us and we're like God. We're like, hey, I love you. Come here. And the cat's like, no, screw you. No, I'm going over here.
That's right.
No, so maybe, I think your sequel should be the theology of cats.
Yeah, people have suggested that, like, all cats go to hell or something like that.
That would be a great title. I thought I was brilliant for a second there. I was like, hey, I just taught a guy that graduated Princeton, something, but never mind. Other people beat me to that. Hey, so but that's rad, man. Like, I never thought about that. What are some of the ways where this has personally impacted your own spirituality? Like, what does this do for your own personal faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that it does for me is it just drives me again and again to remember the importance of our ordinary lives, that there's just something really mystical and beautiful about these ordinary lives that we're living. And I think so often in our spiritual lives and our lives of faith that we kind of yearn for something beyond the ordinary lives we're living, and the gift that God gives us with our ordinary lives is pretty significant. And so, I mean, one of the things this has opened up to me is there's an incredible amount of theological reflection and deep thought just about the way we're making sense of our lives. And something as ordinary as a dog actually has deep forms of meaning for people. So, I mean, maybe to echo to your audience, it's, thinking of church planting and thinking about people in communities, that these really ordinary things they really latch onto and are making meaning with, or finding forms of belonging. And at the very least, we have to respect those. And there's ways that we kind of live out what it means to be human in and through these kind of very ordinary ways.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think from our from my audience, they're constantly talking to people that are throwing out questions like this. Like, for example, what about aliens? Do dogs go to heaven? I mean, you got to think for a second that, when I was in high school, there's a movie come out called All Dogs Go to Heaven. My worst faux pas ever, I am ashamed to say, was when I was hyper reformed. And it was like, I remember, no, I won't embarrass him. I'll just stick to my own embarrassment. I was preaching, and I was speaking at this place, and I didn't know this, the pastor's family hosting me. They just lost their dog. And at the dinner table, I stuck my foot in my mouth. They said, Peyton, do you think dogs go to heaven? And of course, being young and 25 and thinking I had all the answers, I said, well, the Bible doesn't necessarily say, and so we can't with any confidence assume that. And I just looked at the face of the mom. Her lip was quivering, but her eyes looked really angry. And the pastor just out and out said, our dog just died last week. But it's interesting to hear your opinion. I, on the other hand, and he quick tried to save it. I was so ashamed. And, it's really interesting because we talk about this even on the phone call with my best friend yesterday. And we said, hey, look, God's going to repopulate the new earth. I mean, the heaven and earth, new heaven is on earth, kind of like, who was it? Bananarama. Didn't they say that? New heaven is a place on earth.
Yeah.
Sorry. This is how I think. I told you it doesn't get very intelligent. I'm intimidated.
I like
by you.
it.
Have you picked up on this?
No, I like
So here's the deal, right? Basically, I mean, I think if he's got animals to pick from, right, he's not going to be like, hey, we need some dogs. You know what? I'll just make some new ones. He's going to be like, no, dang it. Peyton was in love with, pick any one of them. Cracker, Heathen, Cardiff. Stinky, any of my dogs, Kreskin, Roxy. I've had a lifetime of dogs, man. And I know he's going to be like, hey, you're redeemed, man. I'm picking redeemed pets, man. We're going to put your dogs back here.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the interesting things of researching for this book too, is you find these beautiful and well-known and famous historical figures who have opinions about these things that you didn't know until you started to research it. And one is this beautiful story of this Jewish philosopher named Emanuel Levinas, who was alive actually in a prisoner of war camp during World War II, a really well-known Jewish philosopher. And he writes this little essay on dogs that I had no idea was there. And he's kind of rabbinical. He's kind of a rabbi, and he goes kind of biographical though in this little essay, and talks about how when he was caught in a Nazi prisoner of war camp, every day he'd be taken out to do work, and even the people in the village would sneer at them, and the guards would sneer at them, and they weren't sure, these men who were imprisoned, if they were actually human anymore. They had lost their humanity. He said, except for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, they would come back after the long day of work and dehumanization, and a dog would run out from the woods. And the dog would see them, and the dog would jump, and it would wag its tail, and its mouth would be open. It would be so happy to see them. And he has this beautiful line, he says, where this dog witnessed and reminded us that indeed we were still human beings, that we were still beautiful creatures made by God. And then he goes total Jewish rabbi on it, and he does a midrash on the Exodus story. And he shows that in the Exodus story, there's a text where Moses says to the people that it will be Yahweh, it will be God who will lead you out of Egypt. And you will know this because not a dog of Egypt will bark. Not one dog will bark. Right. And something only a Jewish, rabbi can do. And his point is that this is the righteous dogs of Egypt that participate in the exodus of the Israelites, and that these are righteous dogs. That there are some dogs, of course, who are not righteous dogs. They're just dogs who bite people and are used to oppress people.
Righteous dogs, I love it.
But there are these righteous dogs of Egypt that live in our bedrooms and lick our children's tears when they cry after a bad day in kindergarten, and are there for us when we're grieving our own loss, and who give us these rituals that make us human and get us outside and get us walking and bring joy into our lives. So there are these dogs that are these righteous dogs of Egypt. And so if we think of these righteous dogs of Egypt, then you wonder, well, will we see them again in heaven? I mean, do all dogs go to heaven? And then I stumbled on this beautiful story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who in the 1920s was in a pastoral internship in Barcelona, and a 10-year-old boy came to his flat and was crying, and Dietrich asked him what was up, and he said that his 3-year-old German Shepherd dog had just died. And so, much like your friend here, Bonhoeffer just comforted him and said, "I'm sorry about this." But in the midst of that, the boy wiped his tears and looked at Bonhoeffer and said, "So tell me now, Herr Bonhoeffer, will I see Mr. Wolf," was the dog's name. He said, "Will I see Mr. Wolf again in heaven?" And Bonhoeffer, maybe like you at that kitchen table, was perplexed and didn't know what to say. And my own midrash of it, as I like to say, he didn't take that class in his doctoral studies, the class on dead dogs. He didn't take that class in his pastoral education,
No, I missed that one too.
Right. And so he finally had to answer, and he said to the boy, well, we know that God is love, and we know that God loves you, and we know God loves all animals too, and we know you love Mr. Wolf, so I don't believe that God loses anything that God loves. So yeah, I think that you'll see Mr. Wolf again in heaven. And so I like to think of whatever we think heaven is, and whatever we think eternity in God's goodness and God's embrace is, it has something to do with relationship. And that I think that there's these deep levels of relationality. I mean, this is why we believe we'll see our grandparents or our spouse again, or whoever in heaven, because there's this deep level of almost souls connecting to souls in relationality. And I think dogs touch that. I would never say it's as deep as maybe my relationship with my children, but it plays at that same, or it has that same frequency. And I don't think God loses any deep levels of relationship that continue to reflect God's own being as this relational God that comes to us in the person of Jesus Christ. So, do dogs have a soul is a big question that comes up in the book. And I don't know. It depends on what you mean by a soul, which is a really snooty kind of way a theologian talks about it. But if soul has something to do with a deep level of interconnection and relationship, which I think it is, I think it's more that than just a ghost in your chest or something, then I think we can say that dogs are really soulful, that they engage us in this deep relational way, and that has to have some kind of reflection into eternity, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm gonna throw something really crazy out there.
Okay.
No, I'm not gonna. Never mind. I don't got the guts to say it. Ecclesiastes talks about where he goes, and who's to say, but the man, the soul of a man goes upwards. And I agree. Like the Hebrew understanding of the soul is the body and the spirit. It seems to be that it's a unit, right? That, I had a buddy did some, dissertation work on this, and he says the soul is not the ghost. Like you said, it's the unity, it's the bond of the body and the spirit. And, and we went into the Hebrew and how it's always put there, and that the second death is when the, spirit and body are separated, and on, that's the death of the soul. And so the soul is not the spirit. Anyways, all that to say, whether he's right or wrong, right? There does seem to be, that idea that yes, dogs, it's not like they're just like, where does that personality go? And I've often wondered, kind of like a dog's purpose, is there truth in that? We know that's not true for human beings. It's appointed for man to die once and then the judgment. But with animals, you just wonder, like, have I met you before? Did you come, are you recycled? I don't know, right? That's my crazy. I'm not saying I believe in reincarnation, but I mean, that pretty much is you're just wondering, like, what does God do with Rex?
Yeah.
Right? I know where I go when I die, to be absent from the body is present with the Lord. What about them? What, let's hear you take a stab at that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a really big question, and we're probably both out on the ledge here. But I mean, consciousness. I mean, consciousness
about to be branded heretical,
right? Maybe I'm talking about dogs, no less. But there's something crazy about consciousness. There just is, and that's why no matter how hardcore reductionist kind of person you might be, no one can solve this issue of consciousness, and the yearning for us to have some kind of, I don't know, continuation after death. And just the crazy thing about dogs is that, like you used the word earlier, personality. I mean, we tend not to use word personality for sure don't use, like, rocks have personalities, or, I mean, you have to project a lot of other kind of human reflection on those things to give them personality. You know what I mean? But a dog is just, every dog has personality, which is one of the reasons we're kind of wondering, man, we can actually say whether it's incarnation or not, reincarnation. I'm not sure I'd go there, but whether it is or not, there is a way that personality of that dog reminds you of the personality of another dog, which just shows you the kind of personal structure that exists within a dog that has something profoundly sacred to it that can't be just wiped away. I wouldn't say a dog's purpose is a documentary or a spiritual text.
It's
but
my new theological textbook. No,
right.
It raises questions. You go, well, yeah. I mean, is there anything preventing that understanding? There is no biblical I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying I'm going to preach it this Sunday. I'm just saying I'm a critical thinker. You got to ask these questions.
Yeah, and what it does point to is that dogs encounter us in this kind of through a personality, almost in this a very personal way. And so, I mean, it's rare. Sometimes people will say, "Yeah, that fish has a personality," or that chicken. I mean, he had a real personality. But that's the rare occasion.
I've never
dogs,
met a chicken with a personality.
Either have I. But I was trying to be open to those chicken lovers.
That beluga whale has a personality. I saw what you're doing.
Yeah, but dogs just are filled with personality, which is one of the reasons we love them so much, and they make us laugh and give us joy. So, so there's something that kind of connects us and makes us look at the next dog and wonder, where did you come from? And your personality reminds me of that dog's personality, and I remember the gifts that dog gave me, and there's something beautiful about that.
Yeah. Well, you make me laugh and give me a little bit of joy. Does that make it weird now? Is that strange? Did I wreck that?
No, that's nice.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So here's the deal. We're out of time. Tell me now, The Grace of Dogs, where Dr. Andrew Root, where do we find this book?
Well, probably the easiest way is, like everything in our world now, is just find it on Amazon. It's there, but it should be at most booksellers for a while. It was even at Walmart. So in Costco, I heard it was at Costco.
Your book made it to Walmart.
Yeah. So when you're going to buy and Costco, so when you're going to buy like 2 tons of butter, you could also pick up this book.
Man, I knew I should have written a book about dogs. I just knew it. I wrote my last book. It wasn't about okay. Competition's coming behind you, pal. That's all I'm saying.
I look forward to it. That'll be fun.
You're like, bring it on. May the top dog win, right? No, that's rad, man. Hey, congrats on that. Getting your book into Walmart, that is saying something right there. The book is The Grace of Dogs. I mean, Andrew's been a fun guest. All joking aside, pick this book up. It's going to make you think. It's very well researched, very well written. Andrew Root, been our guest today. This is a book I would suggest you could give, and this is one of the reasons I gave you the real reason, but one of the reasons that we have him on the show today is that this would be a book that you could bring up in conversation easily with anyone who's a human being, which usually means they're a pet owner. Not all of them, but you could bring this up. And people who don't ever want kids always have pets. I don't know if you've noticed that. They always own dogs.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
This is one of the things that you can, just in conversation, this might be, the thin end of the wedge for the gospel, just to get people thinking about God through their dog, of all things. And hey, I'm a by any means necessary kind of guy, right? If the master has need of my donkey, I'll ride it. all the way into Jerusalem, man. That's somebody all the way into their heart. Doesn't matter. But this is a very cool book, man. So thanks for coming on to the show. Is there anywhere else that you would want to send them in addition to picking up the book? Any website, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, my website's just andrewroot.org. They can check that out. And I have actually a new book that's a little bit more a theory book coming out that they may be interested, called Faith Formation in a Secular Age. And that comes out in about 2 weeks. So especially church planner people may want to check that out. So no dead dogs in it, but yeah, it might be worth a read.
But you drop the author thing and they're like, in my previous book, The Grace of Dogs, I said, right?
That's right.
Because it, not surprisingly that your next book, Faith Formation in a Secular Age, you really have written a book that fits that very much so. How people come to faith and just relating to what they already know to talk about something they don't. So
that's exactly right. Yep.
So we're on the same wavelength. So Dr. Andrew Root's been our guest. Thanks for coming on again. This has been Hardcore Church Planting. Arnold, sign us out.
Remember, if you are called to church planting, go hardcore or go home.
You've been listening to Hardcore Church Planting. Hardcore Church Planting has been brought to you by the Church Planter Podcast and the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the App Store for both Apple and Android devices. If you like this episode, leave us a positive review. If you didn't like this episode, we'll be happy to give you your money back.